Claire Luxton and I'm a contemporary artist. Today I'm joined by the super talented filmmaker, director, actor Carlson Young, who is with us today following the premiere of her new film, The Blazing World. Thank you so much for joining me today, Carlson.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
So, now something that I'm very familiar with and that I listed at the start is your many job titles. Can you explain how you're able to juggle them all and maybe which one is your favorite?
Just to start, I think my favorite is directing. But I came up as an actor, and that was very much my entry point into the industry and also my first love. So, I really love all three, directing, writing, and acting. And I was able to do it all on The Blazing World, I think, simply because of a massive amount of preparation and my connection to the character, and because we I conceptualized the film for years before actually shooting. So I would say it was that preparedness, being able to sort of do all three of those things.
I have watched your film. I absolutely loved it. I was in love with the kind of juxtaposition between darkness and the macabre and beauty as well. And I also loved your use of practical lighting as well. I love lighting, so I was really quite drawn to that. Can you talk us through, how you brought your unique vision to life?
It took a lot of grit to be able to sort of get it done during the pandemic, but we had an incredible crew and cast on this film, and we were all very aligned on vision, and so we were able to execute, I think, creatively. But working with my DP Shane Kelly, we just we knew what we were going for, and the same with our production designer Rodney Becker. It was a true collaboration, and we were on a quarantine camp, so nobody had anything else to do. Like, no one was even able to go home to their families.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of sacrifice from many different angles. And like I said, I had been conceptualizing all of these colors and everything for years. So it was just a release.
When you're sort of like coming up with an idea and conceptualizing ideas, how do they take form physically? So are you kind of like a jotter? Do you like scribble things down in like a notebook?
Yes,
or
yes.
Do you have like Pinterest boards of like images, kind of?
I have Pinterest boards. I have Pinterest boards for color mostly. But I'm a really terrible sketcher. So I sketch just these awful little drawings, and my sister-in-law, who is a really wonderful artist, actually storyboarded everything out for me based off of my awful little sketches.
I do the same. Sometimes it'll just be like a line and a shape, but in my head I know what that's referenced to, because otherwise you forget, you don't remember what you were doing. So I know that you used Premiere Pro when making the film. I use Photoshop, Premiere Pro, like so many different elements of the Creative Cloud all the time, and it's really fun just to see somebody else who's using that but in like a completely different way and a completely different dynamic. So can you tell me what products you used and how you used them?
Premiere Pro was instrumental in this project. I mean, particularly because our editor James Crouch was actually assembling as we were shooting. So when we wrapped, I literally had 2 days, and then I went straight into the edit with James. And we love using Premiere Pro because it just makes cutting a film together seamless and conducive to the creative process. And we can focus on tone, and I can focus on story. It just makes it really a seamless process, and there's so many things that go into filmmaking. So having that, having the edit be as simple for the assembly as possible was really, really helpful, especially because we were on a really tight deadline.
How long, so you said you were on like a deadline, so how long did you have from sort of like filming, finishing to getting everything kind of done?
We wrapped roughly September 1st, 2020, and
Okay.
I had a rough cut submitted to Sundance October 7th, 2020, which is like
Wow.
crazy. And I literally, my eyes were like bloodshot. Like I didn't sleep for like 6 weeks. And my husband did the score. And so he
Amazing.
and I literally sat in a studio for like 14 days, just like not sleeping, getting a rough score done to all have finished for this submission on October 7th.
Wow.
So from there, and then obviously we premiered then January, I think 29th, 2021. So once we had the rough cut, coloring and our many VFX came from there, but it was all just like this jam-packed timeline.
And so like by January you can actually like fall in love with it again, because I imagine you go through that thing where you just like you can't see it anymore. It's like, what have I made? What?
No.
Yeah.
No. I actually wasn't, and the cut that was shown at Sundance didn't have our final effects. Like there was a couple of effects in there that were temp because they weren't ready.
Yeah.
And so it was hard. Like it was very, very hard, but we just couldn't turn down the opportunity, obviously.
No,
and so I just was like cringe, like, no.
I mean, you touched slightly on, obviously producing during the pandemic. I know that so many artists really struggled, during this time and were kind of stuck in a rut. And I myself try to keep creating to kind of hopefully help inspire other people to, kind of share and kind of bond through making during that time. What was some of the biggest struggles you faced making a full film, during a pandemic?
Oh, well, I mean, you could really feel the impending just stress beyond our quarantine gates. We were literally in a quarantine, like summer camp style, like nobody in, nobody out, for 5 weeks. And it was challenging, because it was just a really unstable and uncertain time. And everyone was really laser focused on this project, but like still worried about families and what the state of the world is, and that sort of like literal mortal stress, very hard to do on, especially like this first film. I think it was like everyone had to be really brave, and it was of course challenging to get financing, like with any indie film, but even more so because of quite literally a collapsing economy. So it was just a lot. I mean, it was from all angles. It was really challenging.
Well, I take my artistic hat off to you for, just pushing it. And I think, and in the future, surely it can only be easier, next time round,
I've said that multiple times. I'm like, guys, if it is just 5% less, like, stress, I will be so elated.
Yeah, exactly. You can just kind of, there won't be anything holding you back, so, you can just work within
true.
within any parameters. One question
That's true.
I get asked a fair amount is sort of, what have been, biggest hurdles, especially as a female as well, in sort of like a oversaturated, like in photography, it's still quite oversaturated in terms of men. And I imagine, well, from what I know, the same in terms of directing is still true. What have been some of like your biggest hurdles kind of in terms of like, kind of making your mark and kind of pushing your career?
It's hard to get your foot in the door to get people to say yes to your vision. And and that's extremely hard as a first time feature director in general. But being a woman in the genre space, which is very male dominated, you know, I heard multiple times that the script was really feminine, like, which I thought was such an odd critique of the work, because I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I identify as a woman, and I think that's like a good thing and a strength. And then, you know, I think the reception too is like, oh, it's really bold and ambitious and all this. And I'm like, yeah, that's because I think that women in genre are really bold and ambitious, and there's like certainly a space for that. But I think, you know, I think just creating any kind of art or content, you know, that really is tied to your soul is extremely hard, no matter how you identify. So my hat is off to everyone. Everything is a miracle that comes into the world.
Yeah, 100. I mean, it's so, I think you have to have like a certain level of truth and vulnerability with yourself, because you're really like, okay, this is me, everyone. Like this is a piece of myself that I'm sharing with you. And I think people who maybe aren't in the industry or don't make in that specific way realize that it's such a personal kind of element of yourself. So I kind of wanted to ask you, you know, what would you tell like a young aspiring filmmaker who, you know, is just starting out, and kind of any tips that you have kind of getting started and putting yourself out there?
This is always a tough question because there's no straight path, you know, I mean, it's different for everybody, but I would just say, I would tell them to go for it and don't take no for an answer. Take the no's as pivots and redirects, and no is actually an amazing thing to hear, not so much in the moment, but, you know, in retrospect, it virtually always is. And I would tell them to watch great films, read amazing scripts, but most importantly, to find a story that resonates with the deepest part of your soul and just go for it. Because I think it's somewhat easy to create content, which is a wonderful thing in our modern society. But I think that the challenge is distilling the content into its most potent and powerful form.
Yeah.
And that's just a great challenge as an artist.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Carlson. I think it's clearly so inspiring to see what you've been able to achieve, even with restrictions in place. And hopefully this will inspire young film creators all over the world to pursue their dreams and get filmmaking.